Welcome to the FinSights podcast. I'm Justin Nelson, and management consulting is one of those high-performing industries that requires a lot of skill and preparation. Now, the interesting thing is that you see a lot of finance students go down the management consulting pathway. So it's important to get a good understanding of the industry before finally deciding. Wanyu Tang is a graduate business analyst at McKinsey and Company. Wanyu, welcome to FinSights.
Yeah, excited to be here and great
Yes.
to see you again, Justin.
Yes, it is. It is. So yeah, I was having a look at graduate roles in McKinsey, and I noticed that there wasn't a range of grad roles compared to other companies. Please, when you take me through what it means to be a business analyst at a management consulting firm.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think perhaps at a starting point, we should talk about what sort of management consulting is, and then talk about what the role of the business analyst is specifically. So, in terms of management consulting, that's basically the goal is to really try and help different types of organizations solve different types of problems. And so whether that's large corporates, smaller sort of scale up startup organizations or governments, trying to help solve what kind of problems they have, whatever they have in terms of like contemporary issues, also stuff related to like COVID or stuff like strategic problems such as like expanding into new markets or trying to reduce costs. These are some of the types of problems that you typically kind of encounter in consulting. And then to be a business analyst, it's kind of a mixture of quantitative and qualitative problems. And so, for instance, when you're trying to understand what drives business performance, you can think about how they're performing financially and then look at some of the core financial metrics. Or you can look at more of like the HR aspect, what's their operating model, how are employees feeling with respect to the firm, and sort of changing their company structure to help them perform in a more optimal way. And so that's kind of the business analyst role. And then in addition to that, I would say there's a lot of collaboration within consulting. And so what that means is you're working in quite tight-knit teams. There's usually only 2 to 3 analysts and then maybe an associate and then one manager. And you guys are really trying to solve a targeted problem within maybe 4 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And so it's quite high turnaround in terms of the pace of problems. But also you also get a lot of exposure to a ton of different problems throughout, however long you decide to stay within consulting.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, actually, especially the tight-knit teams things. That would be nice. But how would you say it kind of differs from being a business analyst at a bank or accounting firm, for example?
That's also a good question. I think primarily it would be the focus of the work that you guys do. And so at a consulting firm, the work really differs just purely by the nature of the kind of clients we work with and their specific set of problems. I think when you're working in a bank or at a big four or like any other sort of accounting firm, typically they come to you with one set of functional problems. And so at a bank, you'll be looking at M&A, looking at valuations, giving them financial advice on how they should think about that transaction. And then in accounting, it's also quite like, even though it's like advisory work, which is similar, they're more so looking at sort of the accounting performance, looking at how the business is doing on the balance sheet side of things. And so they're kind of quite more targeted in terms of the diversity of work. But in consulting, kind of talked about it before, but it can really be a really broad set of problems that we're trying to solve. And it's really whatever the client needs, whether it's like a startup problem. So for a startup, for instance, they want to expand into a new country, into North America, they can come to us. We'll try and advise them on sort of what's the market entry strategy. Or if it's a large corporate, they could be having issues with their branding. And so they want to bring us in and think about, okay, so what's kind of the landscape within the industry and how can they think about enhancing their brand or value proposition, and then trying to uplift their revenue, for instance. And so it's really, really, I guess, more diversity in terms of the work.
So you said before about the teams thing, but You have your associate, you have your consultants, but what would
Yeah.
you, or how would you describe your kind of role in the team as a business analyst?
Yeah, for sure. So as an analyst, you'd be doing more of the analytical stuff as
Mm.
suggested in the name.
There
And
you
so
go.
um, so think about actually like crunching some of the numbers, doing some of the analysis with respect to like when you're collecting first-hand data, you're going out either talking to actual customers or talking to different experts within the industry. And then you're trying to synthesize all of that information into some kind of insight. That's kind of the role of the analyst. And then associate is kind of the level above. And so what they would be looking for is driving the work, managing the work, and really helping develop analyst level their skills in terms of how they're doing the analysis, but also trying to develop also skills around how to work with clients. And at the manager level, that's kind of they're owning the whole piece of work, and so they'll have like ultimate responsibility of how well the deliverables and how well the final product is with respect to the client, and also just managing the client's expectations and thinking about, you know, when we are solving this problem, are we going to be providing advice that's going to be conflicting with what they want, and how do we sort of deliver that message when it's not something that they want to hear, for instance. And so they really are the main touch point between the team and also the client person. So it kind of varies across the different levels.
Mm. I was going to ask this a bit later, but I think it's kind of relevant now. But I guess what is the career progression in a management consulting firm?
Yeah. It's a bit of a, it's quite similar to other industries, but I think when I came into uni, it was a bit of a black box, especially because I didn't really
Mm.
know what sort of a long-term career path could look like. So in terms of career progression, there's quite a wide spectrum of opportunities. And the reason for that, I'll explain, is because when you do, a lot of people that do come into consulting have the vision of like not knowing exactly what they want to do, but they want to get into a I guess, industry that has a lot of learning opportunities and exposure to different types of work. And so then, as a product of that, a lot of people that come into consulting typically can stay just maybe for a couple of years, 2 to 3 years at the analyst level, and then they'll become an associate and then look to exit into different industries that they are personally more interested in. And so that's a potential progression. Otherwise, people also can do 2 to 3 years and then they want to do further studies. And so, like, they would go on and do a master's of business administration, MBA, or like a master's of public policy, and just like further upskill themselves in like a more, I guess, educational side of things. And then the last thing is you can also stay within management consulting and keep progressing within the firm. And so then after your typical 2 to 3 year tenure as an analyst, you can do maybe another 2 years as an associate, and then become a manager, and then you become like a senior manager or associate partner, and then you finally become a partner. And typically that pathway takes about like 10 years, but it really varies based on what kinds of things you want to solve for within your own career. And I think for uni students, it's probably a good reflective exercise to kind of think about, okay, in 10 years' time, what do I actually want to be doing? Like, do I see myself becoming a partner here at this particular firm, or do I see myself going down a different pathway and like doing something that's more personally fulfilling, and like in an industry that I'm really passionate about? And so that's probably a lot of different factors to consider there.
Yeah, definitely there is. And an MBA always does help. But I remember you studied commerce and law, majored in finance.
Yeah,
But why didn't you go into finance and law? Why management consulting, I guess?
yeah. Um, it's a good question. Like, I think when I came into uni, I did did the degree in commerce and law because of the optionality it gave. And I didn't know if I wanted to become a lawyer, if I wanted to do like finance, if I wanted to just like do something else. And then when I came in first year, there was a lot of like of my mates, they were doing case comps and stuff. So I was like, oh, what is that? Came in and tried one myself and did it with like a bunch of mates. And then we didn't, like, we actually sucked in our first ever case
Yeah.
comp. I don't think we even made it to heats. And then we were
Mm,
like devastated because it's like your first year group, you know, like did multiple nights a week just trying to like put some like slides together. They're probably pretty shoddy in hindsight. And
mm,
then we're just like, oh, we did such a good job. And then you just get shut down completely. And you're like, oh,
yeah.
actually, so much more to learn about like how to do a case comp well, how to format slides, how to communicate things in a visually and clearly understandable way. And just like, there's just tons of learning. I was like, oh, this is super fascinating. And I kind of just got hooked with the business side of things, and just like thinking about more like commercial problems and like strategic problems. And that's what kind of drew me specifically to consulting. Um, and then in terms of like work experience, I did have a little bit in finance and in law, kind of, but I never really had a passion about law in to that extent of like, okay, I see myself becoming a lawyer,
Mm,
getting admitted and like becoming a proper solicitor in, you know, the next 5 years. And then finance, I think I kind of alluded to this before. It was a bit more neat or like more focused in terms of the type of work you're doing. And I think even though I enjoyed finance, I still wanted to keep my options open in terms of like the next 5 years of my career and try and really discover what else was interesting in terms of different industries, different types of work. And so that's what ultimately led me to become more focused in management consulting.
yeah. Case comps thing, that's quite an interesting one actually. Is it? It's one of those things that not a lot of people know, that a lot of people who are good, yeah, don't do well in their
Mm.
first ones, evidently.
It's always starting from zero kind of spot, but eventually you'll get there.
Eventually we'll get there. Yeah, but that's really relates to our next question, which is how the interviews are a big part of that application process, right? I guess they do
Absolutely.
relate to case competitions in a way, but how do you kind of prepare for something like that? And are these case competitions vital for a career in management consulting?
Um, I would say a lot of people that ultimately end up in consulting don't necessarily um, have done a lot of case comps. But having said that, case comps are a really good entry point into like the types of problems that you do encounter within consulting firms. And it's really good taster of like, you know, what it would be like to work in consulting. Um, and then to the second part of your question in terms of like preparing for case interviews,
Mm,
um, I think for me, what really worked well, maybe before that, is just trying to explain sort of what the case interview is. And so, case interview is kind of like a very artificial synthetic construct of like you go into an interview and they'll present to you a specific case about a specific client, and then they'll ask you to solve their problem on like, for instance, like, you know, a US pharmaceutical company, they want to like launch a new like just like a vaccine product or something. And then you
mm,
have to be like, okay, so then how should they go about this? What is the opportunity here? How they like actually, what are the considerations they need to have with respect to like launching it within another country or like global considerations, and like a whole slew of different problems you have to consider. But it's also like quite open-ended because the interviewer sometimes doesn't necessarily have a fixed set of questions they want to ask you, but there's also like other types of interviews where they have like a set prescribed set of questions they'll ask you to try and answer, and that's kind of the case interview itself. In terms of preparing for it, the way that I did it is across a few different documents that I kind of set up. And so the first one is just having a like record or tracker of all the different case interviews you've like practice case interviews you've done. And for that, generally there's a lot of like case books online that are available. If you just Google like the Harvard Business School casebook or like the Kellogg's casebook. There's also stuff from like NYU. Um, there's a few ones from the UK, but you just search
mm,
up like case books and then they'll have a whole slew of resources that you can leverage. And then when you do cases, just find a buddy or like a set of people that you're like comfortable casing with and document all your cases. The second thing that I'll have is like a diary of all the lessons you learned, and like just noting down, okay, what is the process of a case interview? What is kind of the learnings you had within each case that you've done? And then also just like, because throughout the whole process, when you're doing a case interview, there's a lot of different frameworks that you typically can encounter. So for instance, like a profitability framework or like a business like analysis framework. So like looking at the customers, the company, the competition, and then the product itself. So like all these different types of frameworks that you do encounter, you'd also put into a diary that you kind of just like keep updating as you keep learning. And then the last piece is probably something that helped me stand out in terms of doing really well in the interviews, is just having also like a document that has what I call like industry one pages. And so what I did there is like for different industries, so like healthcare or like mining or like financial services, just having one page document that captures like any contemporary business trends, like what's happening within the market. Are there any like broader macroeconomic things that are influencing that particular industry? So for instance, like I remember last year, it was like a very low interest rate environment, and like there was like concerns about I think there was just concerns about like what would happen long term, and like is this a sustainable environment, and like there was also like supply chain shocks. And so having a documentation of like any contemporary business things that you can tie into like if it will come up in the case, you'll have stuff that you can really leverage and showcase that you have contemporary business knowledge as well. And so then that would help you stand out. So to summarize, there'll be like three things: having a like record of what your case is, having a diary that basically notes down all the different processes and tips and learnings you have, and then having one other document that just like summarizes contemporary business things that you can try and pull out as necessary within the case interview itself.
Interesting. Now, last thing, it wouldn't be a complete podcast if we didn't talk about AI and that kind of, chat GPT or whatever now. But what do you think the implications of digital and technological transformations are in this field?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's also probably a really broad question as well,
Yeah.
that doesn't just affect management consulting. And so like more broadly, it'll really just challenge the way that we are currently working and like how we're being productive. And I think, in my personal opinion, there's a lot of opportunities to like streamline the work that we do. And so, for instance, like in terms of like processing large amounts of data, AI is really good at looking through a bunch of like PDF, Word documents, slides, and they'll be able to just summarize the key takeaways into like a more condensed form. And so if you're thinking about the efficiency there, that's also a lot of opportunity. Also just like getting a broad sense of like the industry. So for instance, in consulting, it's quite like there's an expectation that you get up to speed quite quickly with what's happening in an industry. And so it's also really helpful to like try and leverage AI technologies like ChatGPT or like Bard to like try and understand what's happening within an industry and getting a quick sort of snapshot of what's going on. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunities, and I think overall it'll enhance and like improve how we do things.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't take my job, I'll be very happy to use
Yeah.
these things. But yeah, thank you, Wanyu, for your time. This was the FinSights podcast. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and good luck to all the students that are currently in the process of any job applications. Sending you my best wishes and good luck.
Yes. Use these tips, guys. They're very useful.